It was almost 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in October when my phone rang and I saw my brother's name on the screen. Gary never called that late. Not since we were kids sharing a bunk bed in our parents' house in Millfield, Ohio, has my brother ever called me after 9 at night unless something was wrong. "Wayne," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I'd only heard a handful of times in 47 years of knowing him. "Denise is gone. She packed 2 suitcases and she's gone." I asked him what happened. He said he didn't want to talk about it on the phone. Could I just come get him? He didn't think he should be driving right now. I told him to stay put, and I got in my truck in my pajama pants and drove the 11 minutes to the house he'd shared with Denise Ruiz for the last 3 years, a little brick ranch on Cobb Street with a for sale sign already leaning against the porch rail like it had been sitting there waiting for this exact moment. I want to explain something before I go any further, because if you don't understand this part, none of the rest of it will make sense. This wasn't the first time. Gary is 47 years old. I'm 50. We grew up 3 years apart in a house where our father, Harlan Whitfield, ran the hardware and feed store his own father built in 1961, and where he was also a deacon at Millfield Baptist, the kind of man who got asked to say grace at the Rotary Club dinner and got his picture in the county paper every time the church did a food drive. My mother, Louise, taught 3rd grade for 31 years. We were, by every outward measure, a normal, respectable, unremarkable family in a town of about 6,000 people. Gary has had 4 serious relationships in his adult life. Michelle, when he was 26, lasted 2 years. Karen, when he was 33, lasted almost 4. Sandra, when he was 38, lasted 2.5. And now Denise, 3 years, the longest one yet, the one I actually thought might stick. Every single one of them ended the same way. Not with screaming, not with somebody else's name found in a text message, not with the obvious stuff. They ended with the woman telling Gary, almost word for word each time, some version of the same sentence: "I can't be with someone who disappears every few weeks and won't tell me where he goes." Michelle told our mother that at Christmas, years after they'd split, still confused about it. Karen told me directly, sitting across from me at a diner on Route 42 months after she and Gary broke up, because she wanted to know if I knew something she didn't. Sandra never said it to my face, but she said it to Gary, and Gary told me, because back then he still told me things, or at least I thought he did. Every other weekend, sometimes every 3rd weekend, Gary would vanish. He'd say he was going fishing, or visiting an old army buddy, or just needed some time to himself. He'd be gone anywhere from 4 hours to a full day. He'd come back quiet, sometimes with his eyes red like he'd been crying, and he would not explain it. Not to Michelle, not to Karen, not to Sandra, and, as I now knew, not to Denise either. I always defended him. That's the part that's hard to admit now. When Karen sat across from me at that diner asking if my brother was cheating on her, I told her no, absolutely not. Gary's not like that. He's the most loyal person I know. I believed it. I still believe it actually, just not in the way I meant it back then. When I got to the house that night, Gary was sitting on the front steps in a flannel jacket and the porch light was off, and he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him look. I sat down next to him and didn't say anything for a while. Finally, he said, "She found something in my truck." I asked him what. "A bank statement from the joint account I keep separate." She wasn't looking for it. She was looking for the registration because a cop pulled her over for a taillight and it was in the glove box with everything else. He rubbed his face with both hands. She saw a transfer. $850, first of every month going back years, to a name she didn't recognize, Renee Sawyer. He said the name like it cost him something to say it out loud. I didn't know who Renee Sawyer was. I want to be honest that in that moment, sitting on those steps, my mind went to the worst place, same as Denise's must have. $850 a month, every month, for years, to a woman none of us had ever heard of. I thought about alimony. I thought about a secret life in Zanesville or Cambridge or wherever this woman lived. I thought, God help me, that my little brother had been running some kind of double life this whole time, and that all 4 of those women had been right to leave. "Gary," I said, "just tell me. Whatever it is, just tell me." He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said something that has stuck with me every day since. "You're gonna hate me for how long I kept this from you specifically. Not from them. From you." I told him nothing he said could make me hate him. I was wrong about that too for about 6 hours, but I'll get to that. He didn't tell me that night. He said he needed to think, needed a day, and I let him have it because I didn't know yet how much there was to think about. I drove home a little after 1 in the morning and didn't sleep. The next afternoon he called and asked if he could come by. He showed up at my kitchen table with a manila folder, the kind you'd use for tax documents, and he set it down between us like it weighed 40 pounds. "His name is Tyler," Gary said. "Tyler Sawyer. He turned 23 in July." I remember the specific stupid thought I had, which was doing math in my head before I'd even processed the sentence. 23. Gary would have been 24. "He's my son," Gary said. "Renee and I dated for about 8 months back in 1999, 2000. She got pregnant. I was 24, working at Dad's store. No money, no plan, nothing. and Dad found out before I'd even figured out what I wanted to do about it. I asked him why on earth this was the first I was hearing about a nephew who was 23 years old. Gary opened the folder. Inside were photographs, a handful of them, spanning what looked like 2 decades. A toddler in a car seat. A boy of maybe 7 at a little league game in a uniform I didn't recognize because it wasn't a Millfield team. A teenager at what looked like a graduation, standing next to a woman I assumed was Renee. A young man in an army dress uniform, which Gary told me was from Tyler's basic training graduation 2 years ago at Fort Benning. Dad told me if I acknowledged that baby publicly as mine, he'd cut me out of everything, Gary said. Not just the store, the family. He said it would destroy Mom, that her heart couldn't take a scandal like that everyone at church would know within a week, that 30 years of him standing up there every Sunday would turn into a joke. He said Renee's family would twist it, that it would be my word against theirs about who did what to who, and either way our name would be dragged through it. He told me the only way to protect this family and protect Mom was to handle it quietly. Pay for everything, make sure the boy never wanted for anything, but never claim him. I asked him if Renee wanted it that way too. No, Gary said, and his voice went flat in a way that told me this part hurt him more than the rest. Renee wanted me to be his father. Really be his father, not a check in the mail. She moved to Zanesville because her own parents were furious and it was easier to start over somewhere Dad wasn't buying nails and feet from her uncle every week. But she never asked me to disappear. That was all me and Dad. She just, eventually stopped fighting it because fighting it wasn't getting her anywhere and she had a baby to raise. I want to pause here and say something honestly. Sitting at my kitchen table hearing this, my first reaction wasn't sympathy. It was anger, and it wasn't even really anger at my father yet. It was anger at Gary. 23 years. 4 women who loved him, who built lives around him, who left confused and hurt and wondering what was wrong with them, and the whole time the answer was sitting in a manila folder that he could have opened at any point and didn't. Why didn't you just tell them? I asked him. Michelle, Karen, Sandra, Denise, any of them. Why not just say, I have a son, I see him every other weekend, that's where I go? Because the first time I tried with Michelle, I told her there was a kid, and I panicked halfway through and said he was my godson, Gary said. I don't even know why I said it, it just came out. And once I'd said it, I couldn't take it back. And every relationship after that, I just never fixed a lie from the one before. It got easier to disappear and say nothing than to explain a secret I'd already botched explaining once. He told me that over the years, the arrangement calcified into something he almost stopped questioning. He'd drive to Zanesville, 40 minutes each way, see Tyler for a few hours, take him to a Reds game or help him with homework, or later just get lunch and talk like 2 adults. He paid for Tyler's braces, his car when he turned 16, part of a semester of community college before Tyler enlisted. Renee never remarried. She raised Tyler mostly alone, with Gary's money and occasional presents. And Gary lived in Millfield, 15 minutes from our parents, running the second register at the hardware store, going to the same church, sitting through the same Sunday dinners, never once saying the words, I have a son out loud in that house. I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the photograph of the toddler. Does Mom know? Gary shook his head. Dad told her I'd gotten into some money trouble in my 20s, gambling, and that he'd bailed me out and it was embarrassing and I didn't want it talked about. That's the story she's had for over 20 years. She thinks the monthly transfer is me paying Dad back a loan. That is the moment something shifted for me because up until then I had been angry at my brother for hiding something from the women he dated. It hadn't fully landed yet that our father had built an entire second false narrative to feed our mother, and that he'd asked his 24-year-old son to let himself be quietly labeled a gambler and a screw-up rather than let the truth exist in daylight. I didn't see my father for 4 days after that conversation with Gary. I needed to sit with it. Gary asked me not to say anything to Dad yet, said he wanted to figure out what to do about Denise first, whether there was even a version of this where she came back. I told him I couldn't promise that, because I didn't think I could sit across the dinner table from Harlan Whitfield at Thanksgiving in 3 weeks and pretend I didn't know what I knew. On the 5th day, I drove out to my parents' house on a Saturday morning. Dad was in the garage, same as always, running a rag over a socket set he didn't need to clean because he never used it, just like the ritual of it. I told him I knew about Tyler. He didn't ask how. He set the rag down very slowly, and for a second I thought he might actually deny it, tell me I'd misunderstood something, but he didn't. He said, your brother told you. He told me everything, Dad. 23 years of it. My father is 78 years old. He's not a large man, never has been, but he's always carried himself like someone twice his size because of the way this town has treated him for 50 years, like his word settles arguments. Standing in that garage, for the first time in my life, he looked small. I did what I thought was right, he said. You don't understand what this town does to a family when there's a scandal. I watched it happen to the Pruitt family when their boy got a girl pregnant in '78. Randall Pruitt lost half his customers at that feed store inside a year. People stopped coming to Sunday service where he sat. I was not going to let that happen to your mother. She had 2 cardiac events in her 40s. Wayne, you know that. Those cardiac events were in her 40s, Dad. Tyler is 23. That excuse ran out a long time ago. It's not an excuse, he said, and his voice rose for the first time. It's a decision I made, and I'd make it again, because the alternative was watching this whole family get picked apart by people who'd forgotten it by Christmas anyway while we lived with it forever. You didn't protect this family, I said. You made your son lie to 4 women he loved for over 2 decades. You made him choose between his own child and everything else he had. That's not protection, that's just fear wearing a suit. He didn't answer that. He picked the rag back up and started cleaning the same socket wrench again, and I understood that was the closest thing to a retreat I was going to get out of him that day. I left without either of us raising our voices again, but something between us had cracked that hadn't been there an hour before. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved slowly, the way real things do. Gary called Denise twice. She didn't answer either time. He wrote her a letter, actually sat down and wrote it by hand, which is not something my brother does, and mailed it instead of texting it, because he said if she was going to hear the truth for the first time, she deserved something he couldn't take back or soften on the fly. I don't know everything that letter said, but I know the broad strokes, because Gary told me after. He told her about Tyler, about Renee, about our father's ultimatum in 2000 and the 23 years of monthly drives to Zanesville that he'd let 4 different women mistake for something shameful instead of the one thing in his life he was actually proud of. He told her he understood if it was too late, if the years of lying, even lying by omission, had used up whatever trust she had left. But he wanted her to know the truth before she made up her mind for good. She called him 12 days later. Not to get back together, not yet, she said, but because she wanted to meet Tyler. She said something to Gary that he repeated to me almost word for word, because it clearly meant a great deal to him. I could have handled almost anything except thinking you were choosing to lie to me for no reason. Now that I know there was a reason, even a bad one, I at least understand who you are. Thanksgiving that year was, without question, the strangest one our family has ever had. Gary asked our mother to sit down with him 3 days before, alone, and told her everything, including the truth about the money our father had used to explain away 20 years of transfers. I wasn't in the room, but Gary told me she cried for a long time, and that most of the crying wasn't about the child support or even entirely about the secrecy. It was about how long our father had let her believe a lie about her own son's character rather than tell her a truth about her own grandson. She told Harlan, in front of Gary, that she wanted to meet Tyler before the year was out and that she didn't much care what he thought about it. Tyler came to Millfield on the 2nd Saturday of December, home on leave from Fort Campbell, where he'd been stationed since finishing his training. Renee came with him. I met my nephew for the first time at 50 years old in my parents' dining room, over a pot roast my mother had made too much of because she said she didn't know how many people were coming and didn't want to run short. He looks like Gary did at that age, which was strange and moving in a way I wasn't prepared for. The same set to his jaw, the same habit of tapping 2 fingers on the table when he's thinking. He was quiet at first, understandably. 23 years of being someone's secret does something to a person's guard. But by the time dessert came out, he was telling stories about basic training that had my mother laughing so hard she had to set her fork down. My father sat at the head of the table mostly silent for the first hour. Then, somewhere around the pie, he cleared his throat and asked Tyler directly what his plans were after his enlistment was up. It was such a small, ordinary question, the kind of thing any grandfather asks any grandson, and it was the first time in 23 years that Harlan Whitfield had spoken to that boy as family instead of a liability to be managed. Tyler answered him plainly, said he was thinking about electrical work, maybe using his GI Bill for a trade program. My father nodded slowly and said the store could always use somebody who understood wiring since half the building still had the original knob and tube from 1961. It wasn't an apology. My father has never actually said the words, "I'm sorry" to Gary, not once, not to this day. But something in the way he said that sentence, offering a place in the family business to a grandson he'd spent 2 decades pretending didn't exist, was as close as the man is built to get. Denise came to Millfield the following spring, not for a holiday, just an ordinary Sunday, because Gary asked her if she wanted to finally meet Tyler properly, not as a rumor or a line item on a bank statement, but as a person. She said yes. I watched the 2 of them shake hands in my brother's kitchen, and I watched Gary watch them, and for the first time and longer than I can remember, my brother looked like a man who wasn't carrying something heavy behind his eyes. Denise and Gary got back together that August. They're engaged now, and the wedding is set for next June, and Tyler is standing up as best man, which tells you everything you need to know about where that relationship stands today. I think about those 4 women sometimes: Michelle, Karen, Sandra, Denise. 3 of them left my brother believing they'd loved a man who was secretly capable of something dishonest, when the truth was he was the most loyal person any of them could have found. Loyal to a fault, loyal to a son he'd never been allowed to claim, and to a father who never deserved that loyalty in return. Gary hid one thing, and only one thing, from every girlfriend he ever had. Not an affair, not a debt, not a crime. A son he loved so much he let people believe the worst about him rather than break a promise made under threat when he was 24 years old and scared and had no one telling him there was another way. He's 47 now. Tyler's 23. They've had exactly one Thanksgiving as an openly acknowledged family, one Christmas, one spring afternoon in a kitchen where nobody had to lie about who anybody was to anybody else. It isn't 23 years of stolen time. Nothing gives that back. But my brother tells me it's the first time in his adult life he's walked into a relationship with nothing left to hide, and for a man who spent half his life protecting a secret that was never actually shameful, that's not nothing. That's everything.